Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cache Variety Show. We're from the Niche Cache, the niche-cache.com, home of big old hearty Aotearoa sporting yarn and kōrero. We just had an All Whites versus China squad announced prior to the podcast, and I think we'll touch on it later in the podcast, as well as Blackcaps, Breakers, and some NRL, Wellington Phoenix as well. But I'm curious right now, what is one immediate short-term or a hard and fast kind of thought you had from that squad announcement?
The one hard and fast bit is that this is very much a squad for the first major tour of a new cycle. Like you've got, I think, looking through a lot of the big names are there, and you got dudes like Roosters and Lewis who have either recovered from injury or are recovering from injury in time. Um, However, Sarpreet Singh and Ryan Thomas aren't there. Bill Tuiloma and Ben Waine aren't there. The first two, because it says that they're recovering from injury and just sitting these things out, don't want the long term travel. For Ryan Thomas, I fully anticipated that. For Sarpreet Singh, I'm a little bit surprised, but um, it's also just two games against China with an interim coach. It's like very early in a new World Cup cycle. It's not the biggest deal. Hence, also why Bill Tuiloma and Ben Waine recently signed with new clubs, traded in Tuiloma's case, transferred in Wayne's case, sitting back basically for club considerations. So it's little things like that within the squad where there's just not the same urgency as we had in more recent games, even in those Australia games, which were very much following hot on the heels of the World Cup qualifying failure as it happened, but that whole campaign. So expectations are a little bit lower in that regard. It's less like a you've got to be here kind of thing. There's a little bit more of an out, but it's still a strong squad. You still got Chris Wood. You still got a lot of the important dudes. You only really had Winston Reid retiring since that last World Cup because it was already quite a young World Cup. Really, they hit the rebuild when the pandemic happened rather than at the end of the World Cup cycle. So it's a decent all white squad, and I look forward to watching these games. I think also there was one little point where they said two senior goalkeepers have been selected for this window, and a third will join the matchday squad from the under 22 side for each all whites game, which makes it sound like there'll be a different goalie as the third stringer who won't be on the bench, which would be sort of like hang around with the squad, get some experience. Um, Different one for each game by the sounds of it, but I'm not sure how they'll go with that, but I did wonder if Case Sims might be snatched up into that wider all white squad as the third stringer just for experience. And it sounds like I would assume that he'll get at least one of those gigs, if not both. Case Sims, I think it's his first time he will have played for a New Zealand, well, for the under 22s and the curtain raiser. It'll be the first time he's played for a New Zealand rep team, but he's an Ole Academy dude. He's looked really impressive for Western Suburbs a couple of years ago. I was a big fan of not only his shot stopping, but also his ability with the ball at his feet, but also his long passing is excellent. Um, and he's since gone over to Sweden. He's playing like third tier in Sweden, but he, as a teenager, broke into their team, became their starting goalkeeper. And in his off season, he's still staying there for this season. He's eligible for the under 20 World Cup in a month or two, and he in his off season he went on like a little tiki tour, trailing at clubs. He went to one of the top clubs in Norway, Lillestrøm, I think it was. It was something like that. Anyway, he went there, had a little bit of a trial for a while. He went to Leicester City, Premier League club, had a little bit of a trial for a while. Then he went to Nottingham Forest, another Premier League club, soon after Chris Wood had signed there as well, which is a nice little twist. Had a short time there as well, training, did a little bit at Coventry as well, who I think are in the championship. So he's really packed in the busyness for his off season, and he is fast emerging as one of our top goalkeeping prospects. So he's definitely a dude to keep aware of. And just even though that third string goalkeeper thing is really just experience, it doesn't matter that much. I suspect that's something that might have been carved out for him in the with the idea that the under 20 World Cup is coming up.
Don't think we need to do all whites later on the podcast. I think we got
We
all we
don't
need to
really. There's nothing else to
we
do
got
with
all
that
we
squad.
needed to know right there. But if you do want to read about it, I'm sure Nico the Wildcard will have some always thoughts in tomorrow's email newsletter dispatch. Sign up via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com. Might drop some NRL thoughts, some Blackcaps thoughts, whatever's happening in Aotearoa sport that we love to yarn about might be in that email newsletter via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com, every Monday and Friday evening that is sent out via Carrier Pukeko. Big up to the Patreon whānau as well, patreon.com/elnichecase, elnichecase. Doing 2 extra podcasts on the Patreon page at the moment every week. We got the NRL podcast on a Monday, fresh after the weekend's footy. And on Tuesday, we recorded a Blackcaps versus Sri Lanka Test series preview. Blackcaps are about to start that first test. So you might want to check in with the preview because we've got it all there on the Patreon, patreon.com/elnichecase. Best way to support the Niche Case. And there's a couple of extra podcasts every week there as well. On Tuesday, our mindfulness was all about impermanence. And I requested that you formulate your ideas and boil it down, simmer it down to a nice jus, which is a cooking term. What's your impermanence jus that you've boiled down and simmered down over the past 48 hours?
Well, I did manage to do it eventually. It might require listening back to the variety show for people to get the full context of what I'm saying. But when I was talking about like the passages of time, crumbling down castles and stuff like this, and what actually ticked it over for me was I remembered a poem that I first got to know from Breaking Bad, coincidentally enough. Well, that's not a coincidence; it's just a random thing. Called Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, I believe. I don't really want to read the whole poem out, but the poem is sort of about a picture of it's like an image of the statue that used to stand atop a great city representing some great ruler, but the statue has just crumbled down and it's just sand around him. And there's the famous line of the words that are written on the pedestal of the statue where it goes, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." But everything around it is just crumbled and faded away. And so the kernel of truth within that is the idea that over time, great castles are going to crumble down. Like they're gonna get overgrown by vegetation, all this stuff. Like they're not going to be what they once were. Statues of great kings, not only are those kings going to die, but the statues about them someday will crumble down. Same as like your shackled together hut might get blown over in the wind or whatever, or your little cabin on the hills might not be so weatherproof after a little while. Like the passage of time comes for all of these things. Eventually, it's all equal. And if the castle can fall down as well as your little like a big stone castle with a king living inside it can crumble down, same as your cheeky little sand castle on the beach will crumble down. It's all equal in the future, and if it's all equal in the future, then it's all equal now. Like there's no difference. It's all what's a better word for equality? That sounds more politically charged. I'm thinking just like I don't know, a more serene version of that. There's a word that I'm sure it's at the tip of my tongue, but I'm always stuck for words in that way. It's just a matter of
balance.
Balance, great word, great version. Balance will do. It all balances out.
Let's get into the sporting yarn with some rugby league. We've got Warriors taking on Roosters, and I was thinking there's definitely some balance ideas happening here with the Warriors and the Roosters, because the Roosters need to find some balance. And I'm curious how the Warriors, like, what are the natural forces that might balance them out? And this goes back to, that is some serious mindfulness right there. But I'm going to try and ground it a bit here, because footy is a simple game. Rugby league's pretty simple. You run hard, you tackle hard, and that's like what the Warriors did against the Knights. you see like a lot of shots were put on. Tamaita Martin got a bump on someone. Mitchell Barnett's flying out of the line. And the good thing is, however you feel about Marcelo Montoya or Edward Kosi, anytime an opposition team's trying to go around the Warriors, you might get smoked in the ribs by Kosi or Montoya. Like, that's a fair chance that it's going to happen. And I love that. I love that energy, and that's just tackling hard. In the preview to this game, I noted that no Knights player had 10 meters per run or above. 7 Warriors had 10 meters per run and above. That's running hard. So we got running hard, we got tackling hard, we got a Warriors win. How did Redcliffe beat with the Roosters? Running hard and tackling hard. Wayne Bennett stuff, like just show up for each other, lots of energy, lots of intensity, aggression, attacking the other team. And so the Warriors did that in game 1. The Roosters didn't do that. So where's the balance there? Because we haven't really seen the Warriors ever do that for multiple games in a row. The Roosters have done that for seasons in a row. And I'm just curious how that all pans out for this game. Roosters have their like Manu, Suoliti, Tedesco in their forward pack. In their backline, sorry, with Luke Keary and Sam Walker. But their forward pack's a bit iffy, although you do have Nofahu White, who's from Auckland. He's on the bench. You obviously got the cheese, Brandon Smith. I think the Warriors can, if they are aggressive and energetic in their forward pack, they might be able to do something here against the Roosters, but it's more about can the whole team repeat the energetic performance against the Knights? Can they do that against the Roosters? And there's just very little evidence to suggest that will happen, but these are the games we learned from earlier in the season.
Yeah, I think in a lot of sporting competitions, week 2 is the hardest to get a gauge upon. Because at least week 1, you've had all the preseason stuff leading up to this point. And you know where the team finished off last year. You know what they've done to address whatever went wrong, or whatever they've done to bolster up what went right. You have a little bit of an idea, and then you get these week 1 games, which always just throw things in, like everything gets thrown out the window because it's a fresh start, and you think you know which direction teams are heading in, and then they don't. But then often, I think the vibes leading into a season are a lot more stable than you realize. And it's just because you've only got one game to relate to. It's like, it's so easy to overreact. And I think Redcliffe Dolphins, I didn't see a lot of that game, so I can't really comment on how they played. But I can comment as a sports fan who's watched a lot of different expansion teams in the past. The first game is always huge. Like, the first game is this massive, boiled over emotional occasion. There's always a big crowd that turns up. They almost always get a home game because that's how you introduce an expansion team. Like, the league almost always sees to that. And then there's the emotional hangover that comes from that, especially if you get a big win over a team like the Sydney Roosters. It's the sort of thing where, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Redcliffe aren't that good every week. I don't think they've set a standard where it's like, this is the minimum. I would say it's more like, here's the game where things went really well. Can you sustain that? Can you get close to sustaining that? It gets a lot more difficult in the weeks following that. I think we saw that with the Wellington Phoenix women, actually. Their very first game last season was a great battling nil draw. Turns out against one of the weaker teams, which was a nice, convenient thing. They then, I think, shipped 5 in their next couple games and didn't win another game for about 3 months or something. There was definitely a big drop off after that first game. I think what that leads to for the Warriors, though, is that this week 2 game, like, we've seen them stick a stake in the ground and say, like, this is the blueprint moving forward for how we want to win NRL games, basically. I suspect, is it home or away, by the way, against the Roosters?
In Sydney.
In Sydney. So, yeah, there you go. There's another aspect. You've got to go away to Sydney now. A Sydney team that's just lost their first game. Roosters will be fizzing to make amends to that. They're coming off a season where they 6th or so and didn't really make a playoff run. It wasn't normal Roosters things that we've become accustomed to. So they've obviously made adjustments to that themselves and will be actually wanting to show those this time around, which maybe didn't quite get to be the case in week one. I think it's a much bigger test for the Warriors. And I suspect the way they perform in this game will be much more indicative of how their season's going to go than what they did in week one at home against the Knights, who themselves are in a little bit of a sort of, they're not, it's not that they're in a rebuild or anything like that, the Knights. I think they're just they're sort of in that in-between state, which is kind of
They're just
similar to
not
where the
very good.
Warriors
Like
are. Or
they
maybe they're
suck.
just not very good. Maybe
Yeah, don't
it's
worry
that
about who
simple.
cares about the Knights.
But the Roosters are quite good, and that's why this is a better
Yeah,
test.
for sure. So the Warriors have an interesting quartet of players. They've got, and I love this quartet for many reasons, mainly because I all think they're really good. You've got Shans Nickel-Klokstad at fullback, you've got Temaire Martin in the halves, you've got Tohu Harris in the forward pack, and you've got Marata Niokore in the forward pack. And I think these are four key players for the Warriors. And they are all test caliber players. Martin has played test footy, Tohu has played test footy, Niokore and Chance Nickel-Klokstad have played for Cook Islands and Aotearoa. They were both instrumental in the last World Cup. Tohu Harris has kind of dipped out of the international scene, but still one of the best forwards from Aotearoa and still one of the best forwards in the NRL right now. Temaire Martin, if we're talking like backup Kiwis halves, you got Temaire Martin and Kieran Foran. All good. Kind of steering around the Shaun Johnson thing here, and it's all good. We don't need to talk about Shaun Johnson every time we talk about the Warriors or the Kiwis, because I think for the Kiwis,
Especially because he doesn't even get picked for the Kiwis.
Yeah, Temaire Martin and Kieran Foran are better halves than Shaun Johnson probably for the Kiwis, and Foran was in the World Cup squad, so there you go. But all these players are elite Aotearoa players with high pedigrees. Niokore was a star coming through the Warriors system, and he's slightly different to the other three because Nickel-Klokstad, Temaire Martin, and Tohu Harris both spent their early rugby league years as like juniors, not necessarily juniors, but SG Ball or Jersey Flag or under
pre-NRL.
20s. Yeah, they spent those years in Australia. Temaire Martin went to Kibra Park, then he was with the Tigers. Shans Nickel-Klokstad moved to Melbourne and then entered the Melbourne Storm system before coming to the Warriors. And Tohu Harris left the Hawke's Bay and went to the Melbourne Storm. Marata Niokore received the Parramatta Eels development boost. So he came up through the Warriors system, but then he went to the Eels, one of the best development teams in the NRL. And what do you know? He's one of the best like forwards or players in rugby league right now. And those four players they're all hearty Kiwis. Like they've all spent their years growing up in Aotearoa, and they have all spent time in Australian systems, and now they've come back to Aotearoa with the Warriors, and they are all playing at a high level. Tohu Harris had 50 tackles and 11 passes. Only Dylan Walker was the only other forward with more passes than Tohu Harris. So he runs, he passes, he tackles. Marata Niokore was putting shots on. He was running as hard as he could from the second row. He is the Mangere Mountain, an absolute beast. Temaire Martin was fantastic, and Shans Nickel-Klokstad, I called it Roger Tuivasa-Sheck light for round one. By mid-season, he might be doing Roger Tuivasa-Sheck heavyweight things. And that, like, because he only had 2 or 3 tackle busts. If you get that up to 8 tackle busts and 22 runs for 230 meters and no missed tackles, the odd kick, the odd dummy half run, that's Roger Tuivasa-Sheck heavyweight stats. And I think Nickel-Klokstad can do it. But the core fundamental element of this Warriors team that leads me to be encouraged that they can repeat these performances are top-notch players from Aotearoa who have spent time in Australian systems. And that's the spine. Like, you can talk about Shaun Johnson, you can talk about Wade Egan, but you got fullback, half, lock forward, and the Mangere Mountain who just wants to whack everyone. To me, that's a really cool spine for the Aotearoa Warriors to have. And to win these games against the Roosters, as you said, tougher challenge, those players have to be at their best.
And 3 of those 4 players are new signings too, who they've, just were playing their, So playing their first game for the club on the weekend, that's actually not true because obviously Niakore and the Klokstad have been there before, but they've come back. It's it's a I mean, it's a pretty good sign of the club's recruitment, I think, in that case, which is something that's often been criticized. I think every club. I remember when Ufuk Talay took over the Wellington Phoenix, and they asked him like how important is the recruitment aspect of building a squad versus the coaching aspect, like coaching and tactical aspect of how you improve the players, how you deploy the players, kind of thing. And I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it was at least like 60% or something he said was in the recruitment. Like you've got to get the right guys. So anytime a team struggles, recruitment is just the easiest thing to look at. It's not always the be all and end all because you can sign good players and then put them in bad situations and they're suddenly not as good as what you thought you had signed because you're using them wrong, kind of thing. And that's also a thing you see very often with. I'm not just saying the Warriors. I'm saying any team that struggles in team sports, pretty much. But you gotta hype up the Warriors recruitment for this season, and probably also I suspect Andrew Webster's vision for within that too. For the fact that you just picked out 4 key players who look like they and taken up a large bulk of that spine of the team, as you say as well. Who were fresh recruitments to the club for this season?
Big up the Andes, Andrew McFadden,
Yeah.
Andrew Webster, the 2 Andes. They're out here doing some serious mahi for the Warriors. Rolling through some other Kiwi-NRL topics just quickly so we keep the podcast moving along here. You mentioned the Redcliffe Dolphins. Fair play. They were riding a wave of fizz and froth for that first game, but their core is also has me encouraged about how they can repeat that. Because one of the most important players in that style of footy, like shout out Felice Kafusi, I think he was the best, but Jesse Bromwich is a pretty serious rugby league player. Kenny Bromwich is pretty serious. Jeremy Marshall King is in the form of his life, and he does the Wayne Bennett stuff really well. Make your tackles, show up, run the ball when you need to. Those players won't, like, especially the Bromwich brothers, I can't see them allowing a dip in any standard. And they, along with Felice Kafusi, they are from the Melbourne Storm, and they set the standard for round 1. So I don't think they are going to be participants in a lower standard. And I think that's what they do best. Like Jesse Bromwich, if you run into him, you're going to feel it every single tackle, the same way with Felice Kafusi. He's a good passer, helps move the forward in the middle. Kenny Bromwich, we've talked about his role in attacking shape for the Melbourne Storm. But I think in a simpler system with the Redcliffe Dolphins under Wayne Bennett, he is skillful enough to do everything. So it's just like pass the ball to him. He can kick, he can pass, he can run. As opposed to Melbourne Storm, where they would put him in shape to get him into space and one-on-one and stuff like that. Same with Jeremy Marshall King. It's just make your tackles and run. It's simple. And that's the Wayne Bennett recipe. And I think those players can execute that. And they are playing the Canberra Raiders. That's a winnable game for the Redcliffe Dolphins. But I also love the Canberra Raiders because there is a development trend emerging with the Raiders. And you look at how the older players have developed. Like Jack Wyden just keeps getting better, right? Joseph Tapine, Kiwi-NRL example, he keeps getting better. Like he played his best footy last season. So now we're seeing that with Corey Harawira-Naera. He is the dude who has replaced Adam Elliott, and he's been in the Raiders for a few years now. So now he can be a starting lock for the Raiders, and I think he'll play his best footy. Matthew Tomoko, the epitome of Raiders development. He just gets better every game he plays. And now suddenly Sebastian Chris can play, he can be a starting fullback for the Raiders in the NRL, conveniently after he was embedded in the Aotearoa Kiwis World Cup squad. So I think a lot of these Kiwi-NRL players at the Raiders, they are going to develop nicely with the Raiders. You're looking at also at Ata Mariota. He's a Manurewa junior. I think he was born and raised in Samoa, came to Auckland at a young age, spent time in Manurewa, then left for the Raiders system. And someone like Petahola, he was with the Cowboys, recruited by the Cowboys from Auckland, Maris Saints Jr., moved to the Raiders. And this is his second season with the Raiders, I think. So second season, third season, then you're really getting the development bump at the Raiders. One quick thing, Asu Kepaoa. He's from Sacred Heart College. He spent time at a bunch of clubs in Auckland. He was a winger at the Roosters. Roosters recruited him from Auckland. He was a winger. Now he was playing as like an edge forward, and he's on the bench, and he is massive. Like, you hear these stories about NBA players. Giannis Antetokounmpo, he grew after being drafted. Kepaoa looks like he is growing taller in an off season. It's ridiculous, but he is massive, and he is on the Tigers bench as a forward. Last week he played a lot on the edge because Sean Bloor got injured, but I think if Sean Bloor and Isaiah Papali'i are both good for 40 minutes, 80 minutes, Kepaoa will come on as a middle forward, can cover centre and wing. So he is like a light version of Manatini Okore, who can cover edge forward, middle forward, centre, maybe wing. Kepaoa can cover all those positions as well. One last thing, big up Felix Fa'atili. He scored 2 tries for the Sharks SG ball team from Christchurch, Hornby Jr. He's scored a try in every game for the Sharks SG ball. And he is massive, so keep an eye on him.
I know I said a thing about not overreacting to week 1 results earlier, but I do want to ask you about the week 1 check-in on the whole. Well, there's 2 little trilogies that I thought were quite interesting. The first one is the Panthers coaching tree, because you had the Ivan Cleary's Penrith Panthers losing only by a cheeky little point to the Brisbane Broncos on what was that, Friday night, because I was watching the Breakers when that happened, so I didn't see that game. But Cleary's Panthers lost. Old mate Serraldo's Bulldogs got a little bit smoked by a resurgent, but more to the point, fit and healthy again, Manly Sea Eagles team. And Andrew Webster's Warriors had a big victory. So the only one of the 3 there that won was the Warriors coach. I thought it was interesting, but probably more to the point is you said a few times in the off season, like, the best way to judge the Warriors moving forward is to compare them to teams that are in similar situations, and those were the Broncos and the Bulldogs. So how there's a Bulldogs and Warriors crossing over both of those, but how are you feeling about that after the first week?
We're in alignment here because I had that written down. I had Broncos, Warriors, Bulldogs. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the Broncos,
but they did just beat the defending champs.
I kind of want them to suck because a lot of their Kiwi-NRL players are outside the top 17. Dean Mariner, I think Jesse Arthurs could be a starting winger at the Broncos or any other team, but if they're full strength, I don't think he is a starting winger. So you got Jesse Arthurs, Dean Mariner, Xavier Willison, and a lot of other junior Broncos that are Kiwi-NRL juniors coming through. They could benefit from a Broncos team not being very good either. But the Broncos are quite good. They're going to win games. And I don't know how much footy someone like Dean Mariner is going to play, which could be interesting. Given there was already a story about him asking out to go to Redcliffe over the summer that didn't get much airtime. But like, if those dudes are all NRL players, they should be playing NRL. I want to see them play NRL. And I've got this kind of fetish against the Broncos, obviously the Reece Walsh Warriors thing as well. But the Broncos are the best of those 3 teams for sure. The Warriors aren't as good, obviously, and they are also better than the Bulldogs. Because the Bulldogs were really strange. So you think some of the stuff the Bulldogs were doing, Matt Burton was all over the show, a lot of weird attacking plays and shape designs and stuff like that. The Warriors weren't crisp in attack, but it was kind of simple. It was just pass the ball, put someone in space, follow up and support, energy, and that type of stuff. So I think it's quite clear. Broncos, excellent. Warriors in the middle. Bulldogs below the Warriors.
Yeah, all the buzz about the Bulldogs making flashy signings doesn't quite feel like they've addressed the areas where you need to in order to get better in a hurry. Like I think maybe I don't know. I got to
Just keep learning.
the stuff. Yeah, well, the stuff you're saying before about Redcliffe, it's like you have to admire the way they had a very clear plan about how they wanted to build a squad, and it started with signing a bunch of the winningest forwards in the history of the NRL with the winningest coach in the history of the NRL. Like that's a good place to start from, and I don't know that hey, most clubs that are trying to rebuild don't have that benefit of like a fresh start, but also I don't know, the clarity of that I think is there's a lot to be said for that.
Quick word on the Panthers, who are defeated by the Broncos. It's all this talk. Who are they missing? Oh, this player left, that player left. Who are the starting props for the Panthers? It's Fisher Harris. It's Moses Leota. Who's the starting lock? It's Isaiah Yeo. Those three are there. You've got Nathan Cleary and Jerome Luai. Like, at the very least, you're going to be a highly competitive championship contender with those three starting middle forwards. And I think it's kind of that simple, although a lot of people hate the Bromwich brothers for some reason. You said
because of the Storm, basically.
Yeah,
you win lots, you get a target on your back.
They are South Auckland heroes, and they are, as you said, the most winningest forwards like in existence right now. Those are the players you want to build around, and the Panthers still have those players, and so on and so forth. Let's keep working on it along. We just need to do a quick word on the Breakers. They are in the NBL finals. We've talked a lot about them. We went deep into the Mangroves on the Variety Show, and we've kind of covered them from all angles. So I don't know what there is to add for this third game on Friday, fourth game on Sunday, other than like stuff that you've been thinking of since our last discussion. Like what's been top of mind since we went deep into the Mangroves for this Breakers finals campaign against the Sydney Kings?
I think a lot of the stuff I've been thinking about is just building off of the stuff we talked about on the Variety Show. It's like it's not new ideas, it's just the same ideas pestering away, which mostly revolve around how do the Sydney Kings look when Xavier Cooks is back in there? Will Xavier Cooks be, at something close to full capacity as his like MVP, his dual MVP winning self from the NZ and Australian MVPs like consecutively? He's the reigning of both of those things. And not only him, but Derek Walton Jr. as well was, one of their best scorers who was quite influential in the first game, but then started cramping up later on towards the end. I remember amongst a lot of players, that was quite an interesting one. That had the break from the what do you call it, the FIBA window. So there'd been like 10 days between anyone playing games, and you had players on both teams getting like I think Derek Pardon was getting dealt with for cramp in the first game, Walton, and there was a couple others that seemed to be something similar as well, not as serious, but there was a little bit of a strange one. I guess it's one of those things it's maybe it was just a hot day in Sydney, but also they had that sort of 10-day break and a little bit out of rhythm perhaps, and just the intensity of an NBL finals game makes a big difference, especially teams like this, who are the two best defensive teams. So there's no off. It's not like you can just play hard on offense and then, we're scoring heaps, so maybe we can get away with a play here or like a shortcut here or there. It's like, no, these are two teams whose coaches will not allow that. Like there will be no shortcuts. It's going to be difficult and intense. And Walton had his little crampy things in the first game. He also didn't play very much, including none of the second half in the second game. I don't know exactly why that was. I'm assuming it was more of an injury-based thing. Cooks also didn't play the second half. I really felt at the time, like, especially when the Breakers had closed it up to about 4 points at halftime of game two, and then their third quarter just started so poorly after hearing that Walton and Cooks weren't going to return for the game, and it felt like a missed opportunity. Like it felt like there's your opportunity to be super ruthless in a finals game. Their two best players, arguably, are off the court for the remaining, like for the rest of this game. They're going to be back later on in the series. You're going to have to deal with them. Here's your opportunity to really like stick a knife in and get a 2-0 lead and set yourself up with 3 opportunities to win an NBL championship. and it didn't happen. So I am a little bit like, I don't know, a little bit reticent about how that played out. Like I'm slightly worried, but then also, I mean, Cox was obviously dealing with an injury in the first game, the same injury, because he wasn't nearly himself then. So perhaps even if he comes back, there's that very good opportunity, like the very real possibility that he won't be playing to his potential. And maybe that makes him someone who, I won't say a liability for a dude as smart and talented as him, but maybe that's just not the the counter thrust that it might seem like just seeing him in the starting lineup kind of thing. You'd have to wait and see how that plays out. But I think that's definitely an aspect of how Sydney use those two guys moving forward, not just the next game, but the rest of the series, which could be quite decisive, particularly if the Breakers can or can't have some sort of answer or resolution to those kind of questions.
We have talked about like how the Breakers, like what things they could do to slow down this big man for Sydney. And as you were talking, the Brantley Pardon duo just kept coming back into my mind. Like, and especially considering we've talked about them as the leaders of the identity, the culture, and how they've brought into a Kiwi kind of Breakers style of basketball. And I think like there's other things like maybe Rob Lowe gets more game time, or Tommy Vodanovic, or like I've seen Isaiah Liafa defending, forwards and stuff like that. Like there's a
He
whole
could
lot of
do it,
weird,
yeah.
there's a whole lot of funky stuff they can do, but ultimately Brantley and Pardon need to be better than their Sydney opponents, and they can do. Like if Brantley's a big body shooting threes, there's a decent chance he's going to be better than the dude he's lining up against, and Pardon might like. You might as well be playing rugby league. Just run hard, tackle hard. That's all you got to do. So I think there's a chance
Yep.
that those dudes can elevate a bit more, just to dominate their opponents.
And they've still been pretty decent in these two games. It's just, especially in the second game, foul trouble was like those two staying out of foul trouble was such a big deal. I did suggest on the variety show maybe it's one of those things where like give Tom Vodanovic a few more early minutes, knowing that you don't need him necessarily in the fourth quarter, and then if it's going to be a game where the foul counts are quite high because the teams are playing aggressively, because Sydney are persisting with this thing of like just get the ball in the paint and really attack them and draw those fouls out of the Breakers, maybe you just use Vodanovic as like a tank to absorb some damage and be like, you take 3 early fouls, it's fine. We don't care. You play your best basketball in this, and we just make sure that we got Brantley and Pardon playing without any kind of weight on their shoulders in the fourth quarter. But also, I wonder, because the guy you didn't mention is Barry Brown Jr., because Barry Brown Jr. has been phenomenal regardless. I wonder if maybe you chuck the sixth man of the year into the starting lineup and get that impact from the beginning, considering how badly they started both the first and third quarters of that game in game two. I wonder if Barry Brown Jr. into the starting lineup might just be an easy fix of getting some instant offense and making sure they get off to better starts and halves.
He won't be defending any big blokes, though.
No, he won't be doing that. No, no, sir.
We do have the Blackcaps starting their first test against Sri Lanka as we speak. So we'll just react to the team selection and we'll dive into the Plunket Shield. Obviously, some fantastic performances in the Plunket Shield that we might be able to tie into Blackcaps Test cricket as well. The Blackcaps have called in Blair Tickner ahead of Will Young. So they've basically just gone for the extra seamer, which I don't mind considering it is Hagley and you just want as many seamers as you can against the touring Sri Lankan team. Any thoughts there with the Blackcaps Test team that they have selected?
I mean, I don't know that Tickner's the most exciting dude you could call up for sure, but I certainly get the logic of picking an extra seamer. Like I think that is a good idea. I think it's the right thing to do. It just happens that a choice of Tickner and Kukulainen as their backup guys. This seems like Hagley might be the one where you actually wanted a Jacob Duffy or something, but also I don't know that the fourth seamer in effect really moves the needle at all. It's just having that extra workhorse, basically. So whoever can get through the most overs and not get smashed. If Tickner can't do that, then he won't play too many more test matches. But it's a nice opportunity for him. Um, Knowing that our top three seam bowlers are pretty stable, I think Will Young is unlucky to miss out behind Henry Nicholls, but it's the same thing where it's like Will Young, he's in for one test, he's out for the next, but whereas Nicholls keeps getting picked for ages. But the reason for that is because Nicholls had 5 really good years of Test cricket where he scored a lot of runs and built up, money in the bank, so to speak. And Young has not done that yet. Where he's had some nice innings. It hasn't been the easiest opportunities necessarily, being like a converted opener and then now back to the middle order kind of thing, or higher middle order. But if he had been scoring hundreds as an opener, he'd be in the team. Devon Conway scored hundreds as an opener and he is in the team, kind of thing. Like it's not that he's not worth persisting with. He's still very clearly the next guy up. It's just that they're not quite at the point where they want to drop Nicholls yet. And I understand that. I think sort of you got to see things season by season. I think if this is probably the defining series for him, if he can't get a big score or two in this series, I think you probably have to start thinking, okay, well, perhaps we move on now. But I don't necessarily think you need to be making drastic changes when you've got like in the middle of your effective test summer, when you've got like 1 week between series. It's as I understand that, but there is a lot of pressure on Henry Nicholls to perform, and this is where you start getting to the point where it's like, if you don't, I don't know, your head might be on the chopping block kind of thing. But other than him, like he also gets a bit of room because the top 6 aside him is excellent, and that's why you don't need to pick an extra batter, because you've got Latham averaging above 40, you've got Conway above 50, Williamson above 50, Mitchell above 50, Blundell above 40, I think, but in the last 2 years above 60. Like Blundell's recent test batting form since he became the first choice wicketkeeper has been remarkable. It's just it's a solid team that should win. It's nothing too much to worry about.
Henry Nicholls averages 49 at Hagley Oval. So
relevant information, yep.
I expect him to get runs, and that is why the Blackcaps have selected him, along with the history you were talking about there. So it's kind of like again, none of this is to be worried about. Like who they select isn't I don't think you as the proverbial we, I don't think you need to get your knickers in a twist about who the Blackcaps are selecting, because the fantastic thing about Kiwi cricket is it sorts itself out. If you don't score like this isn't Kiwi cricket of old where guys like you score one knock and that saves you for 5 years because there's no one else knocking on the door. If Henry Nicholls, well,
it has for Henry Nicholls, but it's only given him a 12-month reprieve, and
no, but like
that's what we're saying. He's at that point again now.
Yeah, and every time he needs to score runs, he scores runs. So like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the thing. He is forced to score runs, and at some point, he scores the runs he needs to score. It's all good. Like he averages 49 at Hagley. If he doesn't score runs here, someone else will, and it's you're in, you're out. Like there's no need to. Like, I think a lot of people just need to trust in Kiwi cricket right now. That's what I see. I see a lot of people don't trust in some of the stuff, and it's fine to not trust selections. But when there is a natural order of runs and wickets, like you can trust that will sort itself out, as opposed to the opinions of selectors, because the best bowlers take the most wickets. The best batters score the most runs. And as we're about to discuss, if Michael Bracewell doesn't score runs and doesn't take many wickets, well, Mitchell Santner's going to get another chance. And because he's scoring centuries, he's banging sixes, he's bowling his in-swinger, he's ripping balls away from the right-hander. Mitchell Santner is in his bag. I prefer quiver. I prefer in a groove. Mitchell Santner is sizzling, and that is the pressure on Michael Bracewell. Blokes are scoring centuries in every Plunket Shield game. Mark Chapman averaged below like 10 or 15, I think it was, in Super Smash and Ford Trophy, and he just hit a Plunket Shield century. Tom Bruce scores runs for fun. Chad Bowes hit a century for Canterbury. All these dudes are old. We've talked about that. Don't worry about the age thing because all the next dudes are old as well. But they are fantastic, and they are the dudes putting pressure on the Blackcaps. And when there's only a couple dudes under pressure. It's Henry Nichols. And if he doesn't score runs, Will Young will get a crack. If he doesn't score runs, Glenn Phillips will get a crack. And if he doesn't score runs, Rachin Ravindra will get another crack. There's a natural order for Blackcaps Test cricket right now. But I think the thing that a lot of people aren't aware of or they overlook, that natural order is rooted in Plunket Shield. Because dudes are scoring runs and taking wickets in Plunket Shield. And there's a lot of fantastic cricketers playing in Plunket Shield right now. I always mention the older blokes, but you look at some of these younger blokes, like Will O'Donnell had a jolly old time batting up the top of the order for Auckland. Rachin Ravindra has scored runs. Muhammad Abbas has come into the Wellington team and he's scoring runs as an all-rounder. Go to some of these other games. Christian Clark has taken wickets for Northern. Kartanek Clark is playing for Northern in the Plunket Shield, which is pretty cool because he still hit 20 runs at a strike rate of 153 in the second innings, which was lovely. There's a lot of good cricketers, good young cricketers. Dean Foxcroft is scoring runs. Thorne Park scores runs. We were talking pre-show about Canterbury. Last week, Canterbury had Reece Marius scoring 50s in both innings. This week, it's Mitch Hay, their young up-and-coming wicketkeeper, who is playing as a batter because Cam Fletcher's the wicketkeeper. If they're not scoring runs, then it's going to be Bowes, then it's going to be McConchie, then it's going to be Carter. There's a lot of dudes performing at a high level in Plunket Shield, and that is the foundation. Foundation isn't the right word because it's what is pulling the strings of this natural order? There you go.
Well, it sort of is the foundation because that's where it's become embedded. It's not just that you see this trend in the Blackcaps. It's the Blackcaps are being picked out of Plunket Shield. That's where you get your Test players from. Is the first class scene in the country, and that same thing is there. And it is not in Plunket Shield. It's not a thing where it's manufactured. You can't just say the selectors are going with a theory or or whatever and then picking to fit that, because there's 6 different domestic whatevers, and it's just that's the bulk of the players. That's where the scene sits. Curiously, another thing on Hagley Oval, don't think anyone will be surprised to hear this, but it's probably the worst ground in the country for bowling spin. So that's something to consider with Test ground, that is, for Michael Bracewell. 11 Test matches at Hagley Oval. Spinners have taken 30 total wickets at an average of 56 at an economy rate of 3.52 over the same span of time. I think we can disregard Eden Park only having 3 tests and none of them in the last 5 years over the same span of time. But Hamilton is actually surprisingly worse. At Hamilton, in the last 8 test matches at Seddon Park, spinners have averaged 65.92 at an economy rate of 3.46. So a slightly better economy rate than we've seen at Christchurch, but terrible average. I don't know what that is, because Hamilton, you'd imagine, it'd be one of the better ones, and it generally has in the past been one of the grounds where they might consider picking a specialist spinner, or back in the day, 2 spinners, a second specialist spinner. Doesn't seem to have been the case in terms of recent performances, but definitely Hagley Oval is a spinner's graveyard. So, and we've got a touring Sri Lankan team as well. Although Sri Lanka, let's be fair, Sri Lanka have always had at least 1 or 2 really good seam bowlers. They've always got that, and that's not that's a thing that probably gets underrated just because they're a subcontinent team. The legacy of Chaminda Vaas lives on, but there's, Michael Bracewell might want to score some runs, because I don't know that he's going to get to do as much with the ball, and it's with the ball that he's been sort of bulking himself up. But also, again, same thing as what we were saying to start. Tickner and Bracewell and Nichols, the three positions in the squad that are genuinely under a bit of pressure or spotlight or whatever, those are not the guys who are going to decide the outcome of this test match.
Yeah, but who cares about the Blackcaps? Like Plunket Shield. I want to
Yeah,
hear your
let's do some
thoughts.
Plunket Shield.
Oh,
Plunket Shield's been awesome
you
lately.
you went back to Blackcaps. I threw up all this Plunket
I
Shield
did.
stuff.
I did. Well, yeah.
What do you
Okay.
reckon about Santner? Santner's on fire. Like rip into Plunket Shield.
Santner just had probably the best first class performance of his entire career with 100 and then a fifer. I think was that his first fifer? It's not his first class 100, I know, because he definitely got a test 100 for the Blackcaps at one point. Might have even been in Hamilton, come to think of
Yeah,
it.
on it. Look, yeah.
Probably picking on some spinners as he did so. But yeah, the wickets are almost more to the point because we've actually seen Santner in recent times. He's been pushed up the order for Northern in a variety of formats. I think his batting actually has really taken a step forward, particularly domestic level. We haven't necessarily been able to see it in ODI or T20 teams, but domestically, I think he has been given more responsibility as a batter, and he has scored more runs as a batter. We've seen some stunning 2020 knocks, and now he has a fantastic 100. That's good cricket from him, but it's sort of following on a trend. The ripping up ripping up scalps with a ball in first class cricket, that's a bit different from Mitchell Santner.
Well, where was it?
I don't know. It's never happened before. It wasn't anywhere.
Well, this game was at Bay Oval.
Oh, where
That's
was the game? Not this. No, not where was this version of Mitchell Santner?
Yeah,
okay, well there you go. Bay
up.
Oval. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's Bay Oval.
And also, again, not surprising.
Exactly. And it was his first fifer. But what did I
Christ,
say
how long's he
earlier
been
in the
playing?
week? Like Northern are playing with Mitchell Santner, Tim Pringle, and Joe Walker. Central Districts have got Ajaz Patel, Tom Bruce, and Brad Shimulian. Like this spin, Eddie Ashok took 5 for Auckland in the second innings. Will Somerville took 4 wickets in the first innings. Wellington were using, they've got Kieran McComb as an extra spinner, and Rachin Ravindra. He bowled plenty of overs for Wellington as well. So I don't know if and that game was also in the northern region, the spin triangle of Aotearoa. It was at Colin Maiden, I believe, in Auckland. Shout out Colin Maiden, finally got their shit together with a bit of sunshine, got some cricket there, but it would have been pretty dry because it hasn't rained in Auckland for a wee while, so that's in the spin triangle. So no surprises that Somerville and Ashok were really impressive for Auckland. So that's the thing about Santner, like, yeah, he took wickets, but a lot of spinners are taking wickets right now. This is where earlier in this first stanza, it's seamers. It's like, yes, seamers. Yeah, Jerry took 6 for 1.5 RPO. Great. Another seamer did the same thing. Like all the seamers are taking wickets because it's November, late October maybe, and they are loving those conditions. Now it's late in the summer, and it's like, okay, a spinner had a really good, impressive performance, but the other spinner for the other team was really good as well. And then another spinner took wickets, and then this other spinner took wickets. So it's like first stanza, seam heavy. Second stanza, I think it skews towards spinners and their. So I'm like Santner's. I've got Santner as a first 11 talent, and that's just what he did. Like if you put a first 11 talent in favorable spin conditions and they are a spinner, I would expect them to be able to turn the ball. He's always had great flight. He's shown that in-swing variation before. He did it and went straight through the gate of one of the central batters. So that was a first 11 talent performance overall. I don't think it was anything strange or abnormal or ridiculous, although it was abnormal to say maybe. Like he's took 5 wickets, so. But I think that's a reflection on Santner's talent, and it's an interesting performance given what's happening with Michael Bracewell.
Yeah, who is. It's such a weird one how they had Santner in there for ages and then they sort of moved away from him because I think really they moved away from him because he got injured for a while and missed a lot of cricket. And at around the same time, they had that stint where they hadn't played a lot of away tours for a while, and then they had that spell where they went to like UAE, and I think Sri Lanka was quite soon after that. And so you had AJ Patel and Will Somerville getting opportunities as specialist spinners, and then that sort of led to Patel sticking around for quite a while, and then Santner lost his spot. But then there was a weird one where you come back to home test matches and you actually kind of want the Mitchell Santner, Michael Bracewell version of someone who can score runs at number 7, because you're not going to bowl that much. Like, you're a part-time bowler as a spinner, especially with force. And it was for a little while Ravindra, like they went around to him, and then they've come through to Michael Bracewell now. Just seems to be the dude they're persisting with, at least for this season. And it's the same role as Santner did for ages. The same role and basically the same production. And we got fed up with watching Mitchell Santner doing the same thing and being told he's going to be he's going to be like an all-rounder. He can score runs, he can take wickets, and he wasn't doing either of those things. But then they just pick part-timers instead, and they do the same thing. But also, Ravindra didn't score many runs, and Michael Bracewell is not scoring many runs. So if you're picking part-timers to do the job that Santner was doing, but then also they're not doing any better than him in the area where you were supposed to be improving, you can't even say they've come full circle, because nothing changed. It's just they've just picked different players to do the same role over and over, which is why for the millionth time I'll say I'd just rather you just pick Dish Sodhi and have a specialist spinner who you can at least attack with, and he has been scoring some runs lately. Curious, what's his Plunket Shield numbers look like? Because he's moved to that spinner's graveyard of Christchurch, so that might be something to consider. So if Sodhi's averaging whatever comparable to other spinners, but doing so in Christchurch, perhaps that is something that needs to be like a tiebreaker in his favor kind of thing. But
he's got 5 wickets at 27.6, but some of those games might not have been at Hagley.
No, you're right. They could have, yeah. But anyway,
he's also got 142 runs at an average of 71. So not as good as Santner.
No, but pretty good still. Better than what Michael Bracewell is doing for the Blackcaps. Well, you almost need a two-pronged system, though, don't you? Because they tried to bring AJ Patel in. There was like a little spell after Santner, before Ravindra Bracewell, where they tried to have AJ. They considered AJ Patel as being like the spinner in home tests, and he never took a wicket in a home test, hardly bowled in most of them. You almost need it's almost a different job in the horses for courses kind of role. It's almost a different job. You need a spinner for away tours, and you need someone who you can attack with, and then at home you just need someone who can get through some overs leading up to the new ball and can probably score some runs. Since you're not going to be bowling much, you might as well do the other thing. It's almost like two different jobs. It's not like you have one started. It's not like you just have a Nathan Lyon or someone who's just going to bat at 10 and bowlers overs if it's in Australia or if it's overseas. And it's almost like two different roles, like two different things. And it's a different team is required, whether they're at home or whether they're away, just because of the unique nature of bowling spin and Aotearoa, basically.
Which is that's the nature of Test cricket. But the thing is, the Blackcaps are equipped for that. Like, they've got the resources. So
yeah, well, that's true.
Like, that's the thing about Kiwi cricket, again, that a lot of people are overlooking, is you can roll out a different looking team for different conditions. And what we have in Pakistan, it was Ajaz, it was Ish Sodhi, it was Michael Bracewell, and then it was like Southey and one another seamer, and they were competitive. Then you come back to New Zealand, straight back into the 4 seamers, spinner all-rounder, and apart from losing their 4th test to England in a row, that was a competitive series again. So I think there is, for the conditions where they need it, they've selected the specialist spinner. I do think the Bay Oval thing is just a quirk that the evidence is overwhelming right now. So I do find that a bit strange. But outside of Bay Oval, I think Seddon Park is more of a flat deck that helps the spinners, as opposed to like a funky pitch I don't know. Bay Oval just feels a bit more funkier than Seddon Park, which still
Bay
feels
Oval
like
turns, doesn't it? I think what you're saying is Seddon Park, it's not so much that it helps the spinners as it doesn't help the seamers or the spinners. Therefore, it's an even playing field.
yeah, yeah.
Because those numbers there, what I was looking at before, like Seddon Park in the last 8 Test matches, there has been the worst ground in the country for spin by about 10 runs, and none of like there's no ground in the country in the last 10 years where spinners average under 40. So it's not like anywhere is good for spin, and yet Seddon Park's somehow been the worst. I I fully expect that the Plunket Shield numbers will be a lot better than that because it's not skewed by which teams are touring at what time and whatever. But I think that does sort of a solution to that idea of why would a place in Hamilton be bad for spin might just be that it's not that it's bad for spin, it's bad for everyone because they're just flat decks with lots of
Yeah,
runs.
there's
I think
lots of
maybe
runs,
is
yeah.
probably more the point.
But my point is that any other pitch, seamers and a spinning all round is okay. Like the
Yeah,
Blackcaps
it'll
can
get the
still
job
win
done.
tests against, especially against touring Asian teams where conditions favour the seamers. They can still win those tests with a spinner seam attack, maybe 4 deep, and then spinning all rounder as we've got here. Like that's completely fine. The kind of the hole, the only flaw I can see is when they're playing it like a Bay Oval kind of pitch. But then if you go overseas to Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, wherever else, for Test cricket, you've got 3 spinners I'm confident can play a supporting role to that all rounder: Ajaz, Sodhi, and Santner. Maybe all four are pretty handy with the bat, so you're not really losing much there. So it's just about like I think the Blackcaps are well equipped. Again, goes back to Plunket Shield, the depth of Kiwi cricket and having those options. And for right now, if Henry Nicholls doesn't score runs, someone else will get the opportunity. I think it's a really interesting game for Blair Tickner because these are favourable conditions. Same with Nicholls. It's a favourable situation for Nicholls. He averages almost 50 in Test cricket at Hagley Oval. So things are in his favour. So we'll see what happens. Blair Tickner, seam-friendly conditions, big opportunity for him to stamp his mark on this Blackcaps bowling attack because he knows there's a hole opening up. There's like this is the time to take wickets and really solidify you as yourself an option in that attack. Friendly conditions, what are you going to do? And it's just curious. I don't think those players will dictate the result necessarily, but I think they are really intriguing performances in building out this Blackcaps team over the next World Test Championship cycle, because this is the last series of this cycle.
Anyone else catching your fancy of the like recent Plunket Shield stuff? Who's this Muhammad Abbas guy? Who's called a Hundy for Wellington?
He is the son of Muhammad Abbas.
Oh, there you go.
So they were quite entrenched in the Auckland system. The father was coaching in Auckland and then moved down to Wellington. And Muhammad Abbas was playing for the Wellington under-19 team a few weeks ago. And there was quite a bit of media around him there. Obviously, cool story. But he was also dominating that tournament, apparently. And then he came in, he was hitting sixes in his debut game, and he just hit a century for Wellington. And he is he's a good talent. Like, again, these type of cricketers, they need to score runs and take wickets over multiple seasons because someone else has done it for 10 years. So that's where you are on the pecking order, and that's the quality of Kiwi cricket. But it's an interesting one when you get into like the pipelines of some of these teams, because Wellington took Finn Allen from Auckland. And while in Auckland, Finn Allen was a prodigious batting talent. And he just ended up at Wellington, and then he exploded and he became what he became. Muhammad Abbas has the Wellington connection as well. His is a bit different because his dad went down to coach in Wellington. I think he's the bowling coach for Wellington Firebirds. And then the son also went down. But again, he was one of the best players in Auckland for his age group. And Wellington have that thing. They also picked up Nathan Smith as a great young player from Otago. So there's that kind of aspect for Wellington. Then you look at like Cole Jamieson is from Auckland, but he really developed with Canterbury, and you've got the same thing with Will O'Rourke. He's also from Auckland, but he's developing with Canterbury. So I don't know if that fits into the regular like Auckland sucks narrative, or if it's more interesting. I find the mechanisms quite interesting because like Canterbury have a university kind of scholarship system that they can offer. Why did Finn Allen want to leave Auckland to go to Wellington? I don't know, but in Mohamed Abbas' case, you've got the father picking up some coaching stuff. So the mechanisms are quite interesting, but also I love the, how do like Wellington are getting this like elite young talent from other regions and doing the best job of developing them. Canterbury do have players from other regions, but I think they are doing the best job at fostering their talent. I've mentioned the bowlers, like you do have Will O'Rourke, Jamieson came through, but you've also got Henry Shipley, Zach Foulkes, Fraser Sheet, Ed Nuttall. Like all those dudes are local lads. All the batters are local. Cam Fletcher started in Auckland, but he has been in Canterbury for a long time. Like all those dudes, Mitch Hay, Chad Bowes came up through Canterbury. Reece Murray's just come into the team. Canterbury seem to have the most best talent, right? They've got the most of it. They've got the best of it. Although, like the team Central is a very veteran-heavy team, so there's only a few spots available for them. Northern's quite veteran-heavy as well. Auckland mentioned a few lads there. Otago does skew a bit younger. They pick up a lot of players from outside the region, which brings me to my ultimate point about Plunket Shield. And I'm curious to get your thoughts, any bounce-off thoughts about the development stuff, but Plunket Shield is its most fun when Colin de Grandhomme's playing, and Colin de Grandhomme's playing. So that is the time you need to check in with Plunket Shield. It's not necessarily about Colin de Grandhomme because he's always fun, but when he is playing, a lot of other dudes are playing as well by nature of the calendar and all that. So, but I thought about that because it's like, there's only space for Christian Clark, a bit of Cartane Clark in that Northern team as a youngster. And because they'll have like maybe Kugelheim returns, Colin de Grandhomme returns, and so on and so forth. So don't know what you want to bounce off, but hit something and then we'll get into some footy to finish.
Yeah, Phillips brothers are another example of Aucklanders who left for opportunities elsewhere. I think for Dale it was a matter of getting some like I think Dale Phillips and Finn Allen were kind of the same thing. They went to different places, but it was like you're not first 11 here, you can be first 11 there.
Ooh,
kind
Finn
of
Allen
recruitment.
was playing for Auckland.
He was, but
and he was like one of the best.
Was he in the
juniors.
same role?
Not in the same role, but he would have been if he probably stuck around, I reckon.
He might well have done. But it was also like a Martin Guptill and Colin Monroe at that point was still ahead of him, and like you're not quite going to beat the dude.
He still found a way into that team,
batting in the middle order and not doing the same stuff. But yeah, you're right. Like there is a sometimes dudes just like a change, and I think that's probably the Glenn Phillips thing. Is he could start for any team in the country, so it's just a matter of I want to go play cricket with my brother again, so move to Otago. Which is the game that's still ongoing, and he's 66 not out overnight, and it seems to be raining. So hopefully that clears at some point because that's a well-poised game. But unfortunately, any kind of rain delay probably takes away an opportunity to push for a Otago win, which takes away one of the options. But anyway, I don't know. Should we do some football then? If you
we've squeezed
the last 10 minutes.
We've bumped the football desk off into the corner, so.
I almost want to bump it off even further and do Charlisse Leger-Walker instead, but I don't know. There's some of the stuff you're saying there about team building is quite interesting looking at Leger-Walker's situation in the college basketball, but it also applies to the Wellington Phoenix Blokes as well. So we could go either way with
wiggle
that.
Both through. You've got 7 to 8 minutes to wiggle your way through both. Like, do your best.
Well, the reason it's applicable to the Phoenix, whoever interesting weekend coming up because the women are playing away to Sydney on Saturday night and the men are home to Sydney on Sunday, but it's in Auckland rather than in Wellington. Although they have a pretty good record at Auckland, so I don't think that makes too much of a difference. But Sydney FC are pretty good. The women's team is stronger, so that's a much tougher game for the A-League women's side. But I think the more interesting point to the Phoenix at the moment is this, like the one eye on next season, as often becomes the case when you get to this stage, and it's got to be full steam ahead to make the most of this rest of this campaign because they've set things up not as well as they could have done, but they're still set up to where they can make a finals run. They can do something special this season. It's well within their potential. However, it is the last year. Like, I think maybe the reason why that's even more in focus now is because it does start to feel like a little bit of a last dance situation. I don't know if they've got the cameras on. I don't know who the Michael Jordan of the Phoenix is. Maybe Oscar Zavada at the moment since he's scoring every week. I don't know if they got the cameras on or anything like that, but it does sort of feel like, if Vitali's in his last season under contract as coach, I kind of think if he was staying, he'd have signed a new one by now. I look at the news last week that Clayton Lewis, Ollie Sale, and Steven Ugarkovic are all leaving at the end of their current contracts at the end of the season and have probably, reportedly, but at least chosen to sign with other A-League teams rather than going abroad, which I would have thought at least the two Kiwi guys there, you would have probably preferred that. There's plenty more players coming off contract. They've got about 11 under contract, so it's not nothing. But then I also think about the idea of what I was saying before about recruitment and how important recruitment is. If there's a new coach coming in, you do want to at least give them some room to put their stamp on the squad and bring in some players that they like and that they think reflect the way that they want to play. So I don't mind that, particularly when you've got a lot of midfielders coming off contract. That's kind of the engine room of the team. That's kind of where a lot of this stuff gets set. They do have 4 out of their 5 import spots already used up, which I would suggest means that Jan Saas doesn't have very much hope of returning unless someone else leaves or retires or whatever, because they're going to need to probably sign an import midfielder to at least get something going in the middle of the park there. So they're in a little bit of a frisky situation beyond this season, but I almost wonder if it's one of those situations where it's like the club can take care of that stuff, but as fans, we almost just need to put the blinkers on and be like, okay, I'm not thinking about that until the end of the season. Like, I'm not even going to consider it. It might be bad, it might get ugly, but that's why we need to savor the rest of the season and make the most of what could still be a pretty special campaign because they've got that potential. Where it crosses over with Charlisse Leger-Walker is an interesting thing as well, because we were talking a bit before the podcast about how this goes, where it's like, because just for people who aren't aware, I've just written a thing on Charlisse Leger-Walker. People can check that out as well to get a fuller understanding. But she's basically the brightest star in Kiwi basketball coming up. She is absolute superstar at college level, and she's just led her Washington State Cougars team to the Pac-12 Conference Championship. They were the 7th seeded team going into the tournament. No team ranked that low has ever even made the final of the Pac-12 conference before. They won the whole thing. They knocked out 2nd and 3rd seeded teams on the way to it. The 2nd seeded team was, I think, Utah, who at the time were ranked a top 5 team in the entire nation. So not just a good team that is hoping to qualify for the March Madness national tournament, but the kind of team that would be expecting to challenge to win the entire thing. Washington State knocked them out. Washington State have never won the Pac-12 title, for one thing. They've never done that before. They've never won a game at the national tournament. They've only ever qualified for the national tournament 4 times in their history. Once was back in like the mid-90s, and then the other 3 years coincide exactly with Charlisse Leger-Walker joining the team. The 3 years she's been there, they've made the national tournament. It happened 1 time in their entire history. It's happened 3 times since they signed her. She was player of the tournament at the Pac-12 championship. She was absolutely like the best player on the court in every game she played. She was incredible, including clutch play after clutch play in the final too to lead a team to victory. Great leadership as well. You see that. I think that really shines through. You get visions of her in the huddle saying things and whatever, and the way she leads the team on the court. But also, I think that really shines through with how good and how poised she is with the media, particularly straight after games and stuff like this. So she's just an absolute top tier Kiwi sporting prospect, full stop, not just basketball, but across all sports. But one little aspect of that I think is quite interesting is the fact that that WSU team is almost all international. And it's sort of do what you got to do situation because they can't attract the best players are going to teams like that Utah. The best American players are going to teams like Utah, or Arizona, or whatever. WSU can't gather them, but they can sign the best New Zealand player. And of course, Crystal Ledger-Walker played there with her sister for a couple of years as well. They've got 2 Australians in their team. They've got an Estonian, a Kosovo player. They've got their star center, their second best player on the team probably, is from Rwanda. They've got a couple Canadians. I think there's only like 1 American in their entire roster. And then you look at the success that they've had lately and stemming from the abilities of those international players. I think there's a curious little thing. We don't have that much time to talk about it left, but I would lay it out at least for something we might come back to in future podcasts because it's a funky situation and there will be something that can be addressed again because they do have that national tournament coming up in a couple of weeks where they will be hoping to win for the first time ever. And Charlisse Ledger-Walker is the star player whenever they do anything good. So she has 1 more year left of college before any potential WNBA things. And playing for a college that is not as well regarded as others around there means that I think she's underrated. Like she's recognized. People know that she's a talent. People have seen what she's done, the numbers she's put up, the performances that she's had. But I think she's still underrated compared to the best players in the country because she plays for a smaller school. But she's making them not such a small school. And if they can go on a little bit of a run, having won the Pac-12 thing, and if they can go on a run in the March Madness stuff, I mean, that all just reflects gloriously back upon CL Dubs. So something to keep an eye on moving forward. It's probably one of the sneakiest, but also most consequential Kiwi sporting yarns going on at the moment.
An underrated Kiwi in USA basketball. Who would have thunk it? That is the Niche Cast. Big up yourself. Big up Aotearoa. We'll be back next week with more podcasts. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Ciao, ciao.